we move into introducing our speakers. So John Gallop currently sits on both the Red Feather and Centraide Foundation boards. He is the creator of the Community Foundation of Greater Montreal's First Family Fund, a former member of the board of directors, and still today a member of FGM's Philanthropic Advisory Committee. He's had 3 business careers, ending as a portfolio manager at 3Max, now called Raymond James. Fully retired 8 years ago at age 76, John remains very engaged in the community. And the title of his talk today is Everything You Didn't Know About Community Foundations. So John, thank you very, very much for taking the time to speak with us today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and pleasure also to see a few familiar faces in the background here. I'm going to talk about something that is very dear to my heart. I'm going to talk mostly about the concepts of a community foundation. I think you probably all have a vague idea of what it is, but I hope you're going to be surprised to hear some of the details. The first thing I'm going to say is that the idea of a community foundation goes back over 100 years. And it started in the States, not on Wall Street, as one might expect. It started in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, did I not hear that you have a guest from St. Louis? Who you have one guest with you today?
A Rotarian from Cincinnati.
Oh, Cincinnati. Okay, I was close.
Yes.
And what happened was, in 1914, over 100 years ago, a bunch of prominent businessmen got together and realized that they were all trying to do the same sort of thing to help their community. And they said, we can save a lot of time and money if we coordinate our efforts. So they created the first community foundation, and it works. That I'm going to outline it now and come back on it later, but it works like a mutual fund, that each of the donors puts capital in, but retains an indirect, not ownership, because the ownership of the funds is with the community foundation, but retains control on how the funds in each part of the pool is used. Now, let's move to Canada. And the first Canadian foundation, it's the same kind of story. It was not Bay Street. Believe it or not, it was the first Canadian community foundation was in Winnipeg. And Winnipeg remains, it's one of the largest in Canada. In part because the Selkirk family, when they sold their broadcasting interests, media interests, they decided the best way to help the city of Winnipeg, the community of Winnipeg, was to put a large part of the proceeds in the community foundation. Now, Montreal, for reasons that I think we all know, was slow to get off the mark. It's a relatively recent development. And somebody talked about Red Feather. Red Feather no longer exists, but it was rolled into Centraide in 1975, along with the English Catholic community and the French Catholic community. One was Catholic Community Services. The other was briefly FOCCF, which was the Fédération des œuvres de charité canadienne-française. And that created Centraide. But the focus of Centraide was social affairs. And there are lots of other parts of the charity community that are not directly touched. The arts and culture, sports, the environment, and a community foundation can wrap all of those things up. But there was no comparable citywide organization that was prepared to do that. There was, however, in Montreal, a very successful community foundation, the Jewish Community Foundation. It's been in existence for a long time. It has been very successful, but its efforts are not exclusively, but largely focused on the Jewish community and Jewish charities. So in the mid-1990s, somebody said, let's get this act together and combine, create a citywide community foundation. It took the efforts of the two of the largest private foundations in the city to engineer it. One is the McConnell Foundation, and the other is the Chagnon Foundation. The Chagnon Foundation at the time was the largest private foundation in Canada. And I should just mention that the private foundations and public foundations really function largely in the same manner, but the private foundation has a prime, I can't say shareholder, or prime sponsor, and it is subject to slightly more rigorous investment constraints and I believe also spending constraints than a private foundation does. Now, so it took 5 years. It started in the mid-1990s, but the new broadly based Montreal Foundation started in the year 2000. So it's now 20 years old, way behind in size and longevity to many other foundations. The largest foundation in Canada, I believe, is Vancouver. I knew this more closely when I was on the board, but Vancouver, Winnipeg, I think even Ottawa is larger than Montreal. Toronto too suffered some of the same problems that Montreal did of being a too large and too splintered community to pull this together. So let me explain how it works, and I'm talking now specifically about the Montreal Foundation. In most cities, it's the Toronto Community Foundation or the Winnipeg Community Foundation. Montreal decided to do things differently, as we often do. And our founding chief executive, Kathleen Weil, wanted to have a bilingual title. So it's the Fondation de Grand Montréal, Foundation of Greater Montreal, FGM in both languages. And what it is essentially, the core function is the same as first occurred in the St. Louis Foundation. It attracts and manages donations from individuals, from families, from corporations. Anyone can open an endowment fund and can control the purposes to which it is put. When you make a donation, all of the usual rules applied. It can be shares, it can be cash, it can be insurance. You get a tax receipt for the amount of your donation, but the funds then belong to the community foundation. However, as I said at the introduction, the donor gets to control it. It's called a donor advised fund. And what happens in the case of FGM is that I get a letter every spring advising, oh, sorry, let me back up to say that you sign a contract indicating the purpose of the fund. It can be specified or it can be left open to the donor. And you also specify the amount with which you wish it to be withdrawn. The federal government, CRA, requires that every private foundation and public foundation must spend every year for charitable purposes at least 3.5% of its assets. That used to be the case with FGM, but it's now, they've broadened it a lot, and you now can choose your own percentage, and you can say 10% if you want, realizing that the value of your fund will diminish more rapidly. So as I started to say, every spring I get a letter from FGM that tells me how much I have from my fund that I can allocate. I can specify that there are two rules. It must go to an organization with a charitable number, but it is not restricted to Montreal or even Quebec. It can go to any recognized charity in Canada. And that gives me a chance every year to either replace support charities that I'm already supporting, or to innovate, to think of a new use to which I can put it. And I have a very dramatic example of that. My wife was the beneficiary of some very helpful support from the Alzheimer's group, which some of you may have heard of. So last year, part of my funds from my FGM endowment fund, I allocated to AGI, as it's called. So for people with a charitable focus, and I'm certain that just from hearing your introduction, that my audience today does have a broad charitable function. You can think about ways in which a community foundation could help to support that. Now, there are some other people establishing endowment funds who have a different focus. Often they will say, I want to set up a fund that will support research into leukemia, for example, and there are some examples of that. So that the contract that you sign says that a given percentage of the fund each year will go to an Alzheimer's research group. There are other ways in which you can specify it. There are 5 functional funds, so that you can, and I'll specify them very quickly: social services, arts and culture, the environment, sports, education. So there are some pots of money that rest within FGM, focused on those 5 areas. And each year, FGM solicits grant requests, and they get, I believe, 300 or 400 requests in those categories. And they convene committees with the consultation, especially of Centraide, actually, but of relevant, knowledgeable people and groups, academics and others, to advise on how the funds that are available in each of those 5 specialized pools should be allocated. And on top of that, there is also a community fund that, again, with the cooperation of Centraide and others, can allocate broadly funds to the community. So I know Rotary members are involved with many other charities. You should look to FGM as a possible source of funds. There's information on the FGM website that I think will tell you how to submit applications for grants. And that's something that, so that I'm speaking not only as an investor, as a donor, as a contributor, but I'm also alerting you to the fact that FGM or other community foundations can be a source of funding for your cause. Now, let me see what there are other things. Oh, yes, I omitted when I said you can set up a fund. I want to contrast again between a private foundation and a public foundation. A private foundation is really a vehicle that is only accessible to the very wealthy. I think tax advisors will tell you that you need at least a couple of $1 million going in to justify the cost of setting it up, the fact that you have to, that you are obligated to complete federal returns every year, you must maintain minute books, etc. And contrast that with setting up an endowment fund at the community foundation, where you literally could do it in a day or a week. And I can tell you, I won't bother with it now, but I've witnessed a dramatic example of where one was set up in very short, important tax savings in a very short period of time. There is no cost to set it up. There is no cost to operate it other than a management fee based on the value of the assets in your endowment fund. So it's readily accessible. A practical minimum is to set up an endowment fund is $25,000, but you can actually start even smaller than that with the expectation of building it up. Some people make a one-time contribution to their fund. Other people, what I did was I started very small 20 years ago, but I've kind of added it to my list, and as well as supporting my university and Centraide and other church and other causes. I have tacked on a little bit every year and built up my family, and I now call it a family fund because that's another indirect benefit. I have 3 children. I've never inquired. I don't know very much about their charitable giving, but what I started to do 3 years ago is take a portion of my fund each year and given my children the opportunity for them to do something that they would like to do that might be special for them. And 2 of my children live in Ottawa. My daughter works with early childhood education. She's very well aware. One year she put her allocation to the Ottawa Children's winter coat fund. And my son has some musical interests, and there's a charitable organization in Ottawa called Orchidra, KID, that provides musical support and instruments to low-income schools. So it opens so many ideas, and my children have enthusiastically adopted. They've become co-advisors of my fund. Now let me see what else I have to tell you here. Well, I have, it's not a commercial, but because I'm really proposing the concept rather than proposing the Montreal Fund. And if you have ties in another city, there are, in fact, I think almost 100 community foundations in Canada. Many of them are very small. The big ones, I think I mentioned before, are Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, but Toronto, Montreal, the other major cities also have community foundations, and they all function pretty much along the same lines. There is also Community Foundations of Canada. It's a coordinating body to which all the community foundations subscribe. It lobbies for philanthropic tax treatment, for they have an annual convention. I've attended 3 of those. And it proposes and supports philanthropy in many ways. I should also add that the Foundation of Greater Montreal is not just managing and allocating money. They participate in a thing called Vital Signs, where several of Canada's major cities coordinate on I believe it's now run every 5 years, a survey of varying parts of how the various cities compare in dealing with social and economic problems. It has a much broader reach. They have a philanthropic day with speakers and promotion and advertising through the press. And that leads me really back to the final section of what I would like to comment on. And that is that the concept is so good that the financial industry has jumped on it. And it started in the States, where Fidelity Mutual Funds set up a Fidelity Foundation and organized that in order that they not lose assets to the community foundations, that they would offer Fidelity holders the ability to transfer a portion of their funds from their personal investment account to the Fidelity Foundation. Well, they've been quite successful, and of course, they have a direct relationship with the client, and that makes it easy. I think TD Bank was the first to do that in Canada, but now everybody does. My old firm, Max, now Raymond James, has its foundation, but the difference is that the Raymond James Foundation is run out of Vancouver, where they're at offices. The TD Bank Community Foundation is run out of Calgary. Whereas if you think locally, the FGM in the case of Montreal has a staff of about 12 people who know the environment here. And if you are interested in saying, I'd like to find somebody who provides animal care, there are people locally who are able to help you. Well, I back up again a little bit to say that if you support a local organization and you set up a fund to support, say, the NDG Food Bank, the contract that you sign with FGM, and you could give the money directly to the NDG Food Bank, but it would go, if they don't have a foundation, it would just go into the current year, and you would not see any sort of long-term benefit from your contribution. If you do that by setting up an endowment fund with a community foundation that says, I want the earnings each year to go to the NDG Food Bank, part of the contract will say, if the NDG Food Bank no longer exists, we will find a comparable organization. So that there are so many benefits and so many ways in which a community foundation can enrich the charitable options that that an individual has that you do not get through a financial organization. Maybe that's it. I perhaps should have done this before, but I would be very happy to take comments or questions.
Yes. Yes, thank you, John. We do have one question already, and if anyone else has a question, I would just remind you to unmute yourselves. So we have a question from Sam Watts. Canadian foundations currently hold over $100 billion of capital. Do you, John, support the effort that is underway to require foundations to raise their annual minimum disbursements from 3.5% to more like 8% or 10%?
You know, I do, and there are a couple of thoughts in my mind, and that is one that my fund, I'm going to be gone one of these days. My children are co-advisors, but they may be gone too. And I think it makes a bigger impact. And I think moves are coming on both sides of the border to require this.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for John? Here we go. Jim, please go ahead.
What do you mean by here we go? Yeah, John, as a fellow Bishop student, I'm glad to meet you. Thank you very much. I know that you.
How did you know that?
Oh, I've read up on you. I was a little after you. I was there with Larry Smith and Ron Perrone during the late '60s.
Oh, okay, I'm a '57 grad.
Yeah. So, we're only off by a year or two. What can you say? I asked this question a lot to a lot of different people, and I don't think anybody really has the answer. But if you had to take a guess, and you take a look at the amount of social services or support that is given to Canadians or a group in general, what percentage would you say comes from the governments, and what percentage comes from public, community, or private funding?
Oh, I haven't thought about it in that way. Oh, you're setting me up.
Well, I'm just curious because like Sam kind of brought it up by saying like, you know, there's $100 billion that he knows of, let's say, that is out there in the hands of foundations of some kind or another. And when I'm speaking to the kids, as an example, I was at Jean de Brébeuf College a couple of weeks ago, and I shoot my mouth off even if I don't know what I'm talking about. But I said to them, I don't know what the percentages are, but you need to understand as a young person that without the community foundations, without the charities, without all of this stuff, the social safety net provided by the government wouldn't come close to taking care of the people that need help.
Well, I'm sure that's right. It makes an enormous difference. Some of the major institutions, of course, have their own foundations. Bishop's University, for example.
Yeah.
When I make a donation to them, it doesn't go direct to the university as it used to do. It goes to the Bishop's University Foundation. The hospitals have foundations. That's just it is there. In total, it is very substantial.
I'll have to ask the finance minister one day, maybe. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else have any questions for John? Oh, Tanya, please go ahead.
Yes, hi, I'm sorry if I missed this, John, but I understand that I can decide which charity the money is given to, but do I have a say into where the money is invested, or how is my money invested?
Oh, that's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. When FGM started 20 years ago, we decided that there would be one investment portfolio. We had 3 managers. We had a fixed income manager, a Canadian manager, and an international manager. Now, that was when we had maybe 30, 40, $50 million. There's now 400 million there. And it has become very complicated. But there is still only one investment portfolio. The Jewish Community Foundation has several. So that with FGM, you sign on to their investment philosophy and you buy into their portfolio. But I see that changing over time too, so that there would be a portfolio that is more conservative and one that is less conservative. One that is more ESG and one that is less ESG. So there are no limits. It's entirely up to FGM. In fact, at the board meeting, at the annual meeting several years ago, there were community representatives there making a pitch for a larger ESG presence. There's a new, I'm saying ESG, there's a new term for that, I think. Oh no, ESG is the new term, sorry.
Yes, good, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, that's happened. Change, things evolve, and I think we can expect to see some changes in that respect too.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have James Bouchard with a question.
Yeah, regarding the, paying out a larger amount, some organizations have endowment funds where the capital cannot be reduced, so that if you're paying out more than 3.5%, say, you have to have income to be able to cover that. And there have been times where recently, not that long ago, where some foundations found themselves in trouble because they, couldn't pay out the amount they wanted to pay out without reducing capital. So how do you square this with, wanting a payout of 8.5% or 10% if you've got an endowment fund?
I don't have an answer to that. We should ask the people who are proposing that the amount be increased. It may require legal, it may require grandfathering, it may require exemptions. I'm not sure how that would be here.
Thank you, John. Is there anyone else? Sam, did you want to say something?
Well, just a comment to the question that came. It's a very good question, because there are endowments that are out there that require the maintenance of capital. But the point of me asking my original question, John, was that if you look at the purpose of a foundation, it really should be to support charitable efforts in our communities, whatever they may be. It shouldn't be to maintain an investment strategy. If you want to maintain an investment strategy, you do something else. But so I would say that in general, we need to find ways of paying down the monies that are in foundations so they can support the efforts in the community, whatever those efforts might be, on a punctual basis, because the need is right now. The need isn't 100 years from now. And so let's try and solve some of the pressing social issues right now while all of us are still on the planet.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, that's an editorial comment. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Anyone else? No other comments? Okay, so John, thank you so much for joining us today. Our motto in Rotary is service above self, and it is always an inspiration to see how all the talents and the abilities of the self are brought into service. And we're honored to have one of the trailblazers in this mechanism of giving speak to us today. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And you're most welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. It's going to be details. We won't be offended if you feel like you want to sign off, but you're very welcome to stay with us. All right, so moving on.